Hello, Vancouver. Very happy to be back here again. It seems like every 6 months or every year or so I find myself here, and it's a great place to be and to talk about film. So I want to emphasize tonight the strange short history of cinema. It's been with us basically for about the length of one human lifetime. There was a French lady, Jeanne Calment, who lived to be 122 years old, and that's about the length of time that cinema has been on the human radar. It's arguable that this film is the beginning of what we know as theatrical cinema. It was made in 1915, D.W. Griffith, very controversial because of the Ku Klux Klan in it, but it cemented the idea of showing a long-form, complex, almost operatic film to an audience that lasted about 90 minutes or 120 minutes, and off we went. Today, it's 104 years after that, and somewhere in the middle of that, Aggie and I got married. There we are, going out on our honeymoon, and we motorcycled across the United States, and I went to film school. And when I was sitting in the audience like this gentleman showed up. And he was then younger than I am now, and he made his first film in 1913, and he was still working up to the year that he died at the age of 90, whatever it was. So again, this is all encompassing within 1 or 2 human lifetimes. Strangely, that's about the length of the Pyramid Age in Egypt. We think of these as eternal, but there was a frenzy of pyramid building in Egypt, the Great Pyramid and others, for about 150 years, from 2650 BC to 2500 BC. And cinema is kind of comparable. Who knows where we're going with it, how long it will last? Will it suddenly peter out? Certain people seem to think so. But that was the message I got when I was at school, that cinema, as my teachers knew it, was ending. And in fact, the first words out of the camera department's head when he looked at us all sitting there, age 20 to 22, was, "Get out now," he said. Because from his point of view, it had gone on a long slide from 1948 to 1965, and he didn't see that it wouldn't just keep going. And, you know, there are similar signs today, although there are other signs of growth. So it's always fascinating to be at the cutting point of some new technology, which is what is happening now. Here's Margaret Booth. She was a film editor, and she lived to be 104, and she worked on Birth of a Nation. And she was still editing films into her 90s, and she was the head editor at MGM. This is a good quote to kind of get a sense of editing. Although editing is not a very good word to describe what we do, because it conjures up cutting down something that is already created. It has its roots in the editing of text. But this is from Victor Fleming, who directed Gone with the Wind and The Wizard of Oz. Both of them came out in 1939. And he said, "Good editing, whatever that is, makes the film look well directed. Great editing, whatever that is, makes the film look like it wasn't directed at all," which kind of seems strange to hear that coming from a director, but I think his point was that when the film gets to a point where it just seems to be creating itself as you watch it, you're not aware of the artifice that goes into it. And there's a tremendous amount of artifice in what we do. But if you can get to that place, and that's a whole mysterious challenge, the film does seem to exist in a sort of penumbral state between the screen and the audience, and it is being created as you watch it, and you are not as aware of the artifice of what it's going. Unlike the first phrase, good editing, you know you're watching something that is concocted, and great editing, again, whatever that is, that's aspirational, gets you to this other place. On the other hand, there's this quote from a translator. Andrew Wilson is a translator from one language to the other, and this was the title of a chapter of one of the books he wrote, which is my invisibility showing? Because can you be too invisible? Are there times in editing where it has to announce its presence as a concocted thing? I think there is, and we can talk about that maybe in the question area. So yes, invisibility is good, and you know, to see a film that doesn't look like it has been directed or concocted is generally good. On the other hand, there are moments where we do want to kind of force the issue. This is the man who we think invented continuity editing. He, in 1901, made two films, Stop Thief, ! And Fire, ! We're pretty sure that Edwin Porter saw these films, and in 1903 he made The Great Train Robbery and The Life of an American Fireman. But this was the first idea that you could take shots that had been shot out of sequence, and if you put them in a certain order, the audience's brain would swing from one shot to the next like a trapeze artist. Prior to that, all films had just been single-shot things. They were kind of like early YouTube videos, cat videos and things. And that's literally, there were cat videos back in the 1890s. The famous The Sneeze and the famous Kiss, all of these just, it's amazing that we can see people move. This was a challenge when the Lumiere brothers tried to imagine what's the future of this. And Louis Lumiere famously said, cinema is an invention without a future. He thought it was kind of going to be like a hula hoop or something. Yes, people are very excited about it, and who knows what, but eventually they'll just tire of it. Okay, we've seen this stuff. At the same time, there was a man working at Edison's lab, William Dixon, and let me get my book here. He had a completely different idea. This is the book. He wrote it in 1895. I recommend it. It's called The History of Cinema, or The History of the Kinetograph, as he called it. And at the end, he said, "What is the future of cinema? Ask rather from what conceivable phase of the future it can be debarred." It's very flowery 19th century writing. Not only our own resources, but those of the entire world will be at our command. Nay, we may even anticipate the time when sociable relations will be established between ourselves and the planetary system, and when the latest doings on Mars, Saturn, and Venus will be recorded by enterprising cinematographers. So, against all the evidence that existed in 1895, he predicted the truth. It was a leap of faith in the future of the human imagination and the future of technology. He saw color coming, he saw sound coming, and at the time, the experiments that had been done in these areas were very inconclusive and not very encouraging. So motion pictures lived kind of an adolescence for 10 or 12 years, these single-shot movies, and then montage was invented. Montage is a better word than editing. It's the Romance language for what we do. Montage simply means to build or to put together something. If you're building a house and you get the plumber to come and connect up the pipes, he would montage the pipes in French, and Italian montaggio, montaje in Spanish. But it's that connection between the motion picture and this really kind of counterintuitive idea that you can take things shot at completely different times and the audience will go with it. They won't be repelled by it, they won't be upset by it, they actually enjoy it. Why is that? My hunch is that it's partly because the grammar of dreams, which we've been doing, we meaning all life, certainly all vertebrate life, for quite a while. And that the grammar of dreams is already a cinematic grammar. And one of the things that gives power to cinema is that it's tapped into that dream reality and has evolved out of it. This is me in the old days of film editing Apocalypse Now. You can see the boxes of film behind me. And I was looking for a single frame at the bottom of a bin. And that was the world we lived in. It was an analog world. And you had to physically move stuff around. I'm very happy that I lived in that world and learned how to swing on those trapeze bars. I'm happy that that world is gone. I guess if you did the math, I probably worked in that world for about 25 years, and I've been working digitally for 25 years. There was a rule of thumb that we used, which is that 1,000 feet of picture and sound in 35 millimeter lasted 11 minutes, and by some fortuitous chance, it weighed 11 pounds. So it was a pound a minute. You could kind of figure out, how much film do you have? How strong is the floor? How many tons of film can we put in this room? Because Apocalypse Now had 14,000 minutes of film, which was 7 tons of this stuff that we had to move around. Coup 53, the film that's here at the festival, showing at SFU tonight, put Apocalypse Now to shame. It was 32,000 minutes of film, which is 16 tons of film. But it wasn't film, it was pixels, which have no weight at all. By comparison, a single frame of 35 millimeter weighed 314 milligrams. So that frame that I was looking for at the bottom of the bin is this kind of weightless feather of something, but it is extremely important. The difference between a good cut and a not so good cut is sometimes exactly that, 1 or 2 frames. And in those days, we had to keep all of that in our head and lug around 7 tons of film and then be able to find that 314 milligram thing in there and know where it was and how to get to it. This was the splicer that I used from 1972 until the mid-90s when I switched to digital. But it's a little guillotine, you put the film on it and you smack the film and cut it in right along the frame line, hopefully. And you cut yourself sometimes on it. This is Kerry Kohler working on Return to Oz, the film that I directed. And he's mimicking for the audience the moment of first blood. And in the old days, there was a moment where in post-production somebody gashed themselves, either by the whirring wheels or the razor blades that we did, or the synchronizer or something, and you would call out, "First blood," and make a little impression on a napkin and put it on the wall. So it was a dangerous situation. That's Les Hodgson, the editor of Return to Oz, working on the Moviola, this kind of sewing machine on legs. You can see the the bin of film over on the right-hand side. That machine, we loved it and we hated it at the same time. This is me in my editing suite on first night, a Jerry Zucker film. I was using a Chem, and there are the rolls of film in the background. It was a very 19th century technological world, despite the fact that film is a 20th century medium. You really felt that you were working on a railroad somehow. I'm going to shift from this to my current editing room. How many people have seen Coup 53? Anyone? Several? Okay. I need to explain something then. It's partly a detective story because we found evidence that the person who directed the coup in Iran in 1953, a British MI6 agent, had given testimony about this, and then MI6 had come in and told them, you can't include this in the film. This is breaking the Official Secrets Act. And so the makers of this film, End of Empire, which was dealing with the story as it was being told in the mid-1980s, had to recut the film. We found the transcript of that interview and evidence that this man had been cut out. And we interviewed people who worked on the film. Almost all of them are still alive, and they would not confirm that he had ever been in the film. There was clearly some cover-up going on. And what you're about to see is a sort of forensic analysis of the difference between digital and analog. The film that we got hold of the CIA man who corresponded to this MI6 man was shot on 16mm film. And when you cut film in those days, you had to stick it together with Scotch tape, Mylar, and deal with it again as a physical substance. So here, what I'm going to show you is this analysis of another piece of circumstantial evidence of why this MI6 man was cut out of the film. Oh yeah, that little red circle is the splicer that we just looked at before. All right, so this is my current editing room. The great thing about analog, which is what we're looking at here, is that there is a record of what has been used and what has not been used. And when we work digitally, there is no trace of where we might have cut something. In the old days, a piece of film, you actually had to cut that piece out and use it. And if you later decided not to use it, you then put it back in the master roll from which it came. But there is a trace, fingerprints, that say this shot was in the film at one time. There you can see the tape. That line across the bottom of the frame is a piece of Scotch tape. So what I've done here is identified the clips that were used in End of Empire at one point. This clip was used, this clip was used, this clip was used, this and this. And here is Allison, 35 years ago, asking Stephen Mead about Norman Derbyshire.
What kind of a man was Norman Derbyshire?
Norman Derbyshire was a very competent individual. He had a lot of experience. He spoke Farsi fluently, French, and what other languages I don't know. But he was a very capable operator.
And cut. The rules of the game are that if somebody talks about somebody, you have to have reference to that person. So we have this very long transcript of an interview with Norman Derbyshire, which has been cut up. And here we have a roll of work print of Stephen Mead talking about Derbyshire, which has been similarly cut up. when Derbyshire was removed, Stephen Mead had to be removed as well. So that begs the question, what happened to Norman Derbyshire? In the film, we never found the tape, the original film of Norman Derbyshire that had been spirited away too. So we asked Ralph Fiennes to come in and recreate the interview with us in the same environment at the Savoy Hotel that the original interview had been done. Later on, we found a picture of this mysterious MI6 agent, Norman Derbyshire, and it turned out that they looked almost exactly the same, even though we didn't know that at the time of filming with Rafe. I'm going to skip over this, I think. One of the things that's under challenge right now because of Netflix and Amazon and the other streaming services is watching a film in a theatrical setting with a lot of other people. And what I'd like to do here is make an analogy between the amplification that happens in electronics and the amplification, because that's what it is, that happens in a theatrical setting. That this device you're looking at is the first amplifier tube. Later on, this turned itself into a transistor, and then transistors became integrated circuits. But the principle is the same. This was the genius of a man named Lee DeForest who realized these principles. So here we go. If you plug a socket into the wall and deliver energy into a vacuum tube, and there are two electrodes sticking into so it's like a light bulb, but without the filament. The signal will jump from one electrode to the other, and then it will come out, and you will hear the electricity through a speaker. So in its simplest form, this is what happens. So what you're listening to is power, but without any intelligence to it. It's simply 60 or 50 cycles being listened to. What Lee DeForest discovered is that if you interpose a screen between those two electrodes, as the electricity jumps through that screen in a vacuum, it's in a very suggestible state. And whatever the information is on that screen, which might be music or human voice or something, it will pick up that information and merge it with the power of the mains electricity, and it will come out into the speaker. So here is a representation of that. This is like an antenna or a pickup from a record stylus or a magnetic tape or something. And there is the screen. So some information, music in this case, is picked up, and this is coherent information, whereas what we just heard is just power without any coherence. And that information is energized into the screen. But at a very very low level. This is, if you've ever experimented with something called crystal radios, this is what you would hear. But if we merge it with power, so that's what the vacuum tube does, that's what the transistor does, that's what integrated circuits do, is that they trick power into allowing coherence to influence it, and the result is power plus coherence, power plus information. And that surrounds us all the time. That's the essence of what's happening here when I push these buttons. So with this in mind, allow a transformation to take place from this diagram to a theater like this, where you have a projector and a screen. And what's being projected when you watch a film is great coherence. If you multiply the number of people who work on a film, by the time they work on a film, sometimes it equals 300 years of effort. Imagine if that was just a single person who started working on something in, whatever it is, 1719, and 300 years later, they're finished with it, and they say, here, what do you think? You would be impressed. This is 300, but that happens every time we watch a film. There is this incredible desire to make a coherent project, and everyone who works on it in all of their different departments is trying to make what they do cohere together with the things that everyone else is doing, and to give the audience a good experience. But what's actually being projected is very weak. The amount of light on the screen here is very little. It looks a lot, but if we were to open up the roof and allow the sun to come in, you could hardly see this. So we're in an isolated environment here, which is a kind of vacuum. The darkness is the vacuum, and that allows, just as the signal will leap from one electrode to the other in the darkness of the theater, we are in a highly suggestible state, and our imagination will leap from what's up here onto the screen, or vice versa. We will allow what's on the screen to leap into our heads, sort of a mutual influence. The power in this comes from the audience, that if you took the number of people sitting here and multiply the average age by the number of people, you'd come up not quite with 15,000 years, but a lot. But that's here sitting, waiting to be suggested, is, let's say, 15,000 human years of experience, happiness, tragedy, sadness, understanding, sitting in the audience, waiting, wanting to be cohered, wanting to experience something together that will allow them to make this leap with the film, providing that it's a good film. This is the underlying behind all of this. It has to be a good film. If it's not a good film, then the coherence doesn't happen. But in the vacuum of darkness, with this highly coherent signal being projected, the collective power of the audience is something that hits the screen, let's say, and vice versa. The screen hits back at the audience, and you get this mutually reinforcing back and forth. And so just like in the vacuum tube or the transistor or the integrated circuit, we find a way to merge power, which is emotion and experience, with the highly coherent effort of what is being projected on the screen. The common element is this screen. There is a screen in the vacuum tube that allows the current to jump across it. And in a sense, that's what this screen is doing. So you get this back and forth power. And the audience, if it's a good film, the audience is collectively moved and made coherent. And when they leave the theater, that's a different group of people than the people who came in the first place. They came in because they wanted to get this coherent something. As different as each person was, the common thing was, I want to sit with a bunch of other people in the dark, which is a kind of unusual thing, and experience this collective sensation that is being provided by the film. Let's see here. I'm going to make a leap to a quirk of biology, and what I'm going to say is that we have recently discovered, we being scientists and people who study these things, the fact that in every cell of our body there is a film editor busy at work. I discovered this in a book by Nick Lane called The Vital Question: Why is Life the Way It Is? He's a microbiologist at University College London. I recommend the book. It's a tough read, but it's rewarding. He's not the only person that has written about this, but that's where I met it. And they've identified something in every cell on Earth except for bacteria called the spliceosome. And this is a funny name. They deliberately named it this because first of all, it's accurate, but there's a movement in naming things like quarks and other stuff, top quark, bottom quark, that has a kind of funny, seizable quality rather than using Latin names or whatever. So they call this the spliceosome, and this is meant to twin with another protein complex in all of our cells called the ribosomes, which are things that make proteins out of information. So here's a cell, and in every cell of your body is a nucleus, and in the nucleus that's where the DNA lies. It's protected by a membrane, a cell wall, the wall of the nucleus, because it's very valuable stuff and it doesn't want to be damaged by rogue other things. So this is like an inner sanctum within every cell. Here's a close-up view. What we used to think up until, I'd say, the mid-70s or mid-80s is we used to think that something called RNA, which is another protein complex, would copy a section of DNA. RNA copies information from a section of DNA, and it takes that copied section and marries it with these ribosomes, which exist outside the nucleus. They're a little too big. Ribosomes use information from RNA to make amino acids, which are the building blocks of every cell. But ribosomes are too big to get into the nucleus. So the RNA has to leave the nucleus, and it can wiggle through the wall, and then zip, the two things come together and you make the building blocks of proteins. So this was an adequate first idea of what went on. Now what we know is that there's another player in this. Another protein complex called the spliceosome. So RNA copies, ribosome is waiting for the information, but we now believe that 92% of all human DNA is junk. And it's only after the spliceosome has weeded out the junk and reorganized the rest of the information that the RNA can go outside and allow ribosomes to make proteins. So this is triggered by the discovery when we sequenced the human genome. We were amazed to discover that the amount of junk is so high. This is information in the DNA which you cannot make proteins out of. It's like software bloat in a sense. It may have been useful at one time, but like all software bloat, it's too expensive and risky to try removing it, so we just leave it there. But that means that there has to be something else, which is the spliceosome, that fixes it and cuts out the bad bits and takes the good bits and reorganizes them into a better sequence. So DNA has, in a sense, has been recently demoted into simply a database of information. It's like the dailies from your film. They're sitting there on the hard drive. There's a lot of junk in there, and it's up to the editor to take all of that and find out what's good and bad and put everything else in the good order. The mystery we still don't know is, where does the spliceosome get its orders from? Because it's a very active thing. The guy who discovered a lot of this, Philip Sharp, said, evolution may have found some advantage in going with a system so complex that it is doomed to fail with some regularity. The equivalent to how many films fail at the box office. The ability to excise introns, which is the junk, and in different patterns, and reshuffle the exons, which is the good stuff. He says, oops, sorry. Anyway, we have to find a better way to deal with this good information buried under a mountain of junk. And that's going on inside every one of your cells right now. So the question is, who is really in control? Is it DNA or is it the spliceosome? We don't know. Our suspicion is now that it's the spliceosome. I'm going to leave you with the state that I'm in right now. Having finished a film, if somebody had explained this to me when I was at film school, I would have been very happy because, as all of you know who work in film, the moment that you finish a film is a kind of dangerous psychological state where something that has been your entire life is suddenly not there anymore. And for a while, you have the cinematic equivalent of a kind of seasickness, that you don't know what to do next. Everything seems to be kind of bad. And if you read the news, there's a lot of stuff that certifies how bad everything is. And eventually it goes away. In my case, it takes probably 3 weeks or 6 weeks of just kind of going through this state. And I, as a kid, came up with some version of this, or I experienced some version of this when I would go in. I grew up in New York, and I went to the Macy's Day Parade with those big balloons, and I'd watch the balloons go by for like an hour. And then the best part came when the last balloon had gone by. I would look down at the asphalt of where I was standing, and if the balloons had been going left to right, I would see the asphalt moving right to left. It was like it was oozing like lava going in the opposite direction. And the first time I saw this, it was disorienting, as you can imagine. I was like 5 years old. And so I looked, where's it going? And I would look to the left, but that was moving to the left. Where's it coming from? I would look to the right, and it was moving to the left. After 15 seconds or so, the illusion would disappear. And eventually, by age 6 or 7, I figured out that it's something going on in my mind. Obviously, it's not really asphalt that's moving like lava. This has a name in psychological terms. It's called the Waterfall Effect, because you can experience the same thing if you go hiking somewhere up in the mountains here. Look at a waterfall for 20 seconds or so, and then quickly look to the rocks to the left of the waterfall. The rocks will seem to be flowing in the opposite direction from the waterfall. So here is an example of that. What I'm going to ask you to look at is the center of this circle. Just focus on the center of the circle, and don't look to the left or right, just look at the center and see what happens. So there's this compensatory motion. It should be fading by now. That circle was coming in, and when you cut to a still image, the image improbably seems to be oozing in the opposite direction. And the analogy I'd like to make here is with your mind working on a project. So here you are at the beginning of a project. In a sense, you're going to climb a mountain that's going to maybe last 6 months or a year, who knows how long. In the case of Coup 53, we were working on it, I was working on it for 4 years. So as you climb this mountain every day, you get a little bit higher toward completion, which is represented by the top of the mountain, this little plateau at the top. And in your mind, you think, someday I'll be done, and you will climb into the finished position, and now you're done. And it's like you're standing on top of Mount Everest, having successfully climbed the mountain. However, what experientially is going on is this. There you're happy, you think. So anything that is sustained as normal for a period of time, we flatten it out. It's like those glasses that turn the world upside down. So initially you think everything's upside down because there's a prism here. After about 5 hours or so, your brain says, I can't stand this anymore, and it turns the image up right side up. And now you're delivering to the retina an upside down image, but your mind has corrected that. So in a sense, even though you are climbing a mountain, because that's constant in your experience, it simply becomes the road that you're traveling. It becomes horizontal. And so, as far as your experience goes, this is what's happening as you reach the top or the end of the project. And here comes the disorienting part, because when you actually step on top of the mountain, you feel this weightless kind of disorientation at first, and then you settle down, and for a period of time, weeks maybe, your brain is telling you two different things. You think, I'm finished, and yet it feels like the world is coming apart. For editors, what that means is every day for a year, you're taking stuff that's coming to you from outside, and you're making it coherent. There's that word again. You're taking relative chaos and finding how to place it in the right order. So you're making coherence out of disorder. When you stop, we get this compensatory thing. Now you're just looking at something that is not changing anymore, but it seems to be coming apart. You sit at home on the sofa, look at the wall, and you think the world is going to hell. And you just have to endure it. It's like, again, I made the analogy, it's like being seasick. It's just something that you need to get a grip on. You still feel bad, but at least you know what's happening, like seasickness. People who don't know what seasickness is, when they experience it, they think, kill me now, I can't take any more of this, because there doesn't seem to be any end to it, and there doesn't seem to be any reason for it. Now, we know there is a reason for it, which is the discontinuity between what your eyes are seeing and what your eustachian tubes are feeling. And what that tells the body is you've been poisoned, and so you try to throw up to get rid of the poison. Anyway, here you are in this abnormal state for a couple of weeks, hopefully not much longer. And the danger is that you'll fall off the edge, but as we all know, you start on another project, here you are at the beginning, and off you go again. And you're really happy right here. Well, thank you very much. I think I'd love to ask any questions or answer any questions that you have.
Thank you so much. We have a few mic runners that are just on either side, so if everyone just wants to raise your hand, and then we'll make sure that we'll get you right here and on.
Oh, hi. I guess I'm the first, so thanks so much for the wonderful talk. That was incredible. I have an overly specific question about American Graffiti's sound mix.
Absolutely.
So the film was released, as far as I know, in 2 different versions in the early mid-70s. You had the version where the studio mandated 3 or 4 minutes of cuts, and then the second version where they allowed the filmmakers to reinstate those scenes, and also with a new stereo mix. My question is, were you involved in that stereo mix?
Yeah.
And how did that differ to the mono mix, and what was that like, kind of reimagining the film with binaural sound instead of monaural sound?
Ask the last part again.
What was the experience of kind of reimagining a mono mix as a stereo mix after the fact like, and was that kind of a new experience?
This was 1977, 78 that we did this. So it was very early days in Dolby Optical. And what that was a system that allowed on an optical track to have 3 channels behind the screen and 1 channel of surrounds. And we basically took a very simple attitude toward it, which was to put the dialogue in the center speaker and then to take the music that we had for the film and use and stereoize it. If we could put our hands on an original recording of it in stereo, we would use that. If only all that existed was mono, we would use electronic trickery to kind of make it seem like stereo. And we would put that left and right and a little bit into the surrounds. And then the cars, when they would move very fast left to right, we would pan them. So it was pretty basic, but it also allowed us to have a better frequency response. In the old mono days, you couldn't get any signal over 8,000 cycles on the soundtrack. It had a severe end to what it could reproduce. And when Dolby came along, they allowed us to go another half octave up to 12,000 cycles per second, which is significant. It feels like a crisper reality. So that's what we did. It was the first time that I had mixed a stereo film, even though at the time I was working on the 5.1 mix of Apocalypse Now. Well, we didn't call it 5.1 in those days, we called it 6-track, but it was what became 5.1. In a sense, that working on American Graffiti, stereoizing the mono mix of Graffiti allowed me to cut my teeth in the stereo world at kind of a simple level. Apocalypse Now was much, much, much more complex on many, many levels.
Thank you. We have another question just right here.
Hi, I'm interested in your thoughts on frame rates and temporal sampling. 24p or 24 frames being the standard pretty much up until now, but that looks like that might be shifting, or different audiences maybe of different ages will be attracted to different frame rates. And I just wondered if you could chat about that for a little bit.
Yes, society came to the conclusion that 24, or in Europe 25 frames per second was a good place to be for movies. And this was done at the beginning of the sound era, because films before that some of them were projected at 16 frames a second. And that was considered for sound, but one of the things that you learn about sound is that the faster the analog medium goes across the head or past the needle or past whatever the pickup is, the lower the noise floor is, the less hiss and crack and pop, pop kind of stuff. So 16 frames a second wasn't fast enough to give good sound, so they upped it by 50% to give you 24 frames a second, and that then became the standard. It's good. It has its limits because when something is panning left to right across the screen, past a certain point, the mind kind of gives up and the thing starts to jump rather than look like it's smooth. Another example of this is the backward wagon wheel effect in Westerns, where there goes the Conestoga wagon, but it looks like the wheels are going backwards. You can solve this by increasing the frame rate. This was something that Peter Jackson did in his Hobbit films. What he found, similar to what I found, I was editing Captain EO, which was a 3D film, kind of an event film for Disney Studios back in the mid-'80s with Michael Jackson. And I would edit in 2D, just looking at one screen, and then every Friday we would sync up the other eye, what the other camera was seeing, and then we would put on the glasses and look in 3D at what we had edited in 2D during the week. And one of the first things I noticed is that when Michael Jackson did his moonwalk, it looked perfectly fine in 2D, but when it happened in 3D, his body would stutter across the screen. And this was perplexing at first. I couldn't figure it out. But what I think is happening is that in 3D, the brain is paying a great deal of attention to the edges of things because it has to line up those edges to create the three-dimensional illusion. As a result, it abandons any attempt to smooth out that horizontal action. And so you get this stuttering. So it needs help. And if you photograph a film at 48 frames a second, doubling the speed, then horizontal movement in 3D does not judder. And that was his thinking. What became clear, however, was that people felt another kind of dissatisfaction, which was that high frame rate made the illusion of film seem to have disappeared. So instead of really believing that these were characters in this world, it suddenly, to many people, just looked like actors in costumes sitting in a set because they were seeing too much detail. So 24 frames might have been, even though it was purely accidental, it might be a kind of conceptual sweet spot where it takes just enough effort for us to decode it, and that allows our imagination to kind of complete the picture. When we supply more information at a higher frame rate, then certain things don't look as magical anymore. So it's the balance point between this technical problem of juddering horizontal movement in action scenes and the need to conjure up this kind of illusion that we all love from films. Doug Trumbull, the genius behind 2001 visual effects, is experimenting with a system that alternates speed from 120 frames a second back to 24. And this is done live in the theater as you watch the film. I don't fully understand how he is going to coordinate that, but he's working on it. And I saw an early test of it. It's, it's good. So what would happen is in a big action scene, the film would ramp up to 120 frames a second, and so it would all of the movement would not have this judder to it. It would look very fluid. And then when you needed to go back to an ordinary dialogue scene, it would crank back down, imperceptibly back down to 24 frames a second. It's technologically very, very complex thing to achieve. Is it worth it? No, I don't know. There has not yet been a film that does that, but Ang Lee has experimented with high frame rates also. So it's something that we're investigating, but it has other problems too.
Thank you. I think that's all we have time for.
Oh, no.
One more? Okay, let's just do one more, and then if you have any other burning questions, we'll make sure to get you. This one, sorry? Yeah, perfect.
So, Walter, going back to the spliceosome and the evolution of human genetics, are we saying God is a film editor?
Yeah.
Or all film editors are God?
Right, yeah. When you're in the editing room at 3 o'clock in the morning and nothing's working, this is designed to make you feel good. That every cell of your body is busy splicing away, making the perfection that is you, and that's to encourage you to keep up the good work and make your film as perfect as you can possibly make it.
All right.
I did an animation of this that's posted on Vimeo, so if you go to Vimeo and look up Spliceosome animation, then you'll be able to see this again with a little piece of music about it too. So this is highly cutting-edge science at the moment. It has not yet penetrated into general awareness. It will, but it hasn't done yet. But what it basically does is attack what you might call the hegemony of DNA. The DNA is stupid. It's stupid in the sense that there's a lot of junk in it, and it just sits there. It's a crystal. DNA is what they call an aperiodic crystal. It's like the stuff on your hard drive. It's just sitting there. The spliceosome is an incredibly furious, active complex of 200 different proteins, each of which has a job to do, and they've got these little what are called CRISPR scissors that come in, and as soon as the RNA has copied a section of DNA, the spliceosome attacks it and says, in, out, better organization, okay, off you go. And it goes out and makes the correct proteins. It may be, one of the things they're investigating is that this may be an avenue through which things that affect you in your life are made to produce proteins that help to you in your present situation. They've studied people in wartime who have terrible experiences, and their kids inherit some of the damage that the parents have, and sometimes it goes even another generation. This is analysis that's going on in Vietnam as a result of people damaged by the war experience there. And it may be that the spliceosome somehow has an agency in this active thing. You can't easily change DNA, but you can very easily change the information in RNA by cutting out bits and rearranging it, just as we know from editing film.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much. If we can just do an amazing round of applause. This is our last creator talk for VIFF 2019, and what a creator talk to end on. May I all suggest you run out and get tickets to Coop 53. It will be playing at SFU at 6, and then if you have any further burning questions, they'll be doing a Q&A after that film as well. I watched it last night, and it is, my brain wouldn't stop afterwards, so highly recommend. So yeah, thank you very much. Let's do another round of applause for our sponsor, IATSE. And have a really great